George, are we good to go? Okay, thank you.
Hey, Derek, Grant, and
Maybe
the
the signal
Grand
was still
Boulevard
base.
closure.
That's what it was. Still signal.
We gotta plan that when we do the street closures. When we do Grand, and Grand Boulevard's closed for the weekend. No, for the monthly street, Grand Boulevard's gonna be closed for those weekends.
Yeah,
No.
okay, guys, we're live here. We're going to go with the committee of the whole meeting, so. Okay, if everyone's got their microphones on, the hour is 7:57 PM. I'd like to call to order the Brookfield Village Board Committee of the whole meeting for Monday, April 11th, 2022. Bridget, can we have a roll call, please?
Trustee Ketchmark?
Here.
Trustee Cote?
Here.
Trustee Hendricks?
Here.
Trustee Conroy?
Here.
Trustee Leclerc?
Here.
And Trustee Kaluzny?
Here.
And President Garvey.
Here. Thank you, Bridget. Okay, the one item we have under regular business is a consideration of a financial policy. We have updates, and there's a committee memo that we received from Doug. Doug, do you want to summarize?
Good evening. The Finance Department has decided that we're going to formalize all of our policies, and this is part of the process of that. I would like to put together a policies and procedures manual for the Finance Department, and some of the stuff we're going to use this for would be for outgoing reports for the public and some internal reports. But what this does, it's a start of formalizing some of the policies that we've been practicing already. But it goes before the board, and it's like an administrative policy. It goes before the board reviews it and approves it, and then it goes into a little binder that we keep in the Finance Department. And if there are any questions further on down the road, we know where to turn to so that there's no question as to what our policy says. Some of the instances, for what is our collateralization level? What is our debt limit? What do we want to work for as far as pension funding goes? And all these types of benchmarks are in these policies. So that's kind of where we're going with this. So the first four that I'm looking at here are the cash investments policy, the debt management policy, the fixed asset policy, and the police and firefighter pension funding policy. Three of those policies are heavily regulated by state and federal statutes. So in the cash investments policy, I'm just going to run through that. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, there is some more stuff here. So the four policies or guidelines I followed, there are pretty much four that I followed in putting these together. One's the best practices suggested by the GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers Association. It's a professional organization which kind of regulates under GASB and in its own operations the policies for best financial practices. Industry standards, I took a number of policies at neighboring municipalities, looked through them, picked out what I thought was applicable to the village, and blended it with what we already have. Illinois state statutes, those are mainly for the pension and for the debt. That's where those regulations came from, and those are all folded into the policy. And then also the Illinois Municipal League. They provided some guidance on some of these other policies, particularly for the cash investments policy. Okay, so for financial policy updates. Why are we doing this? Well, it will aid in long-term fiscal health, hopefully. If we follow the policies that we have set up here, chances are as we move down the road with them, we will incur growth and a solid reserve. That's really what this is all leaning towards. Solid reserve in our general fund and our other funds, which we can then go to the bond rating agencies with and say, here's our policies, here's our reserves, here's our audit, blah, blah, so forth and so on. And hopefully our bond credit rating will go up from where it is at this point. Promote financial stability. It will provide a stable, long-term goal that we can achieve. Say we want to do this, and then we can look at our policies and kind of move forward with those policies. And then, like I said before, the policies will help, they'll be considered in the determination of the village's bond rating. We have to go through, for instance, we're going through bond rating for 2022 for these new bonds. I'm assuming that it'll probably come in by the end of April, early May, and then I'll be able to hand them our policy booklet and say this is where we're at, and hopefully that will at least they can check off another box on their list of things that they look at as far as determining what our overall bond rating is going to be. Cash and investments policy. The first one on there, this is something we've been following, but now it is in formal writing. It's easily seen. It will ensure compliance with state law. State law has a lot of different regulations as far as levels of cash that we can maintain in certain institutions. For instance, pension funds are allowed to invest in equities. We cannot invest in equities. We are prohibited from investing in equities. We can invest in treasuries, other sorts of governmental agencies. Part of that is a very conservative approach to investing for the village. Now, we don't have a whole lot of money in those types of agencies. We're very on the edge, so to say, as far as reserves go. So most of our reserves are held in cash or savings accounts with the First National Bank or with two other institutions. The second thing that we're looking for in our cash investments policy is to preserve the principal. We just naturally do that simply because we collateralize the investments, and that's specifically stated in the policy as to what level we need to collateralize it at. Sufficient liquidity, that kind of speaks for itself, and the yield benchmark is also in there. What basically it says is we want to achieve this investment, this annual rate of return. Right now, we set our annual return is equal to the Illinois Investment Fund. It's called Illinois Funds. It's IPTIP. It used to be the old IPTIP fund. Debt management policy. Debt management policy is basically governed strictly through the state and through the federal law. Our role in determining debt management policy is to put together a group, should we decide to issue debt, and then move forward with it, and that's all explained in the policy. But one of the important things is the policy says we need to look at the situation and determine whether or not we really do need to issue debt. Is this something that we can find other revenue sources for this project? Do we have to issue debt to fund this project? And that's what the development of the framework and issuing debt is about. So overall, the debt policy says who, what, where, and when, and it helps us define where we're going to issue this $2.5 million, for instance. We follow that policy. We picked all of the players and everything like that, and now we're at a roll where we can go ahead and get the money into our pockets by the end of the month of May. And I did, just so you know, I did send this debt management policy to our financial advisor, Kay McKenna. They looked it over, and then they gave me some advice, and I implemented their suggestions into this policy. Again, the objective of the debt management policy also is to provide assurance to the rating agency that the government is well managed and is more likely to meet its debt obligations in a timely manner. That, of course, is very important for anybody. They want to make sure that they get their principal and interest paid on their debt. Fixed asset policy. Fixed asset policy is an internal policy. We kind of set up our own rules. We have to follow generally accepted accounting principles for this as far as depreciation goes in other sorts of institutions. But what we do basically in this policy is we say, okay, anything that is $5,000 or more the cost of an asset, we're going to put that on our books as a fixed asset. It describes depreciation, the depreciation years that we're going to depreciate the asset over, and those types of issues. So those are our kind of internal type policy, but we do follow generally accepted accounting principles in developing that policy. This is basically determined by past history as well as auditor suggestions. Our auditors look at our fixed assets every time they come out here, and they continually make suggestions. One of the items within that is to possibly have an inventory of our fixed assets performed. We have not been able to do that simply because of cost-benefit analysis at this point in time. So hopefully that will be something that we can follow up on. I know our new auditor is looking for us to review our fixed asset inventory. Finally, one of the last ones is the public safety pension funding policy. It states in this policy what our assumptions are, what our goals are to achieve our overall goal. Basically, our overall goal is to meet full funding by the year 2040. But basically what the policy says is hire a qualified actuary. Do what the qualified actuary says. We have some movement in our assumptions. We can give him some guidance as to what we want to do. But it also describes how the actuary works and how it will go ahead and will present these findings to our public safety pension funds, and then the agreement on the level of funding, et cetera, et cetera. So, and again, this one is guided mainly by the Article 4 and Article 5 statutes for the pension funds under the Illinois state compiled statutes. Right now, just so you know, I wrote this down here, we are currently funded at 50% for our police fund and 80% funded for our fire fund, which are pretty good. The state average is slightly below 50%, so we're above average on both of our pension funds, which I think is very good. And actually, I think Moody's kind of likes that too. I think that they've made some comments in our rating agency report that because we're so well funded, relatively speaking, in our pension funds, that's not as much of a concern to them as opposed to some other issues. So those are the 4 main policies that I worked on. The other policy, it's just it's an overall bridge, a general financial administrative policy. There's 7 of them. It's kind of like a blanket that I can plop into a budget report and say, these are our overall financial policies. And for instance, there's one on budgeting. It affects budgeting, it affects auditing, and it affects our monthly reporting. And so if you read into it, it tells us where our guidelines are. And this is more of a day-to-day type policy that anybody in the finance department can go ahead and take a look at and figure out where they're going to do with this. Kind of a guide for that. The revenue expenditure policies that are in there, it talks about review of the tax levy, and appropriate fee structure, and how we should really look at those before we raise the fees or look at our levy amounts based on what our expenditures are going to be. And our expenditure levels should be such that we want to provide adequate superior service, I should say, to the residents of the village of Brookfield. And that's all molded into the budget process. And then our general fund reserve policy, we've had a 25% general fund reserve policy since I think 2011. One of the things I did want to point out here is that it does require 2 meetings prior to the release of any funds in our restricted reserve fund. Our reserve is made up of 2 components, an unrestricted and a restricted. And right now our restricted fund is held at the First National Bank of Brookfield. It's over $1 million, but before we can touch that money, we need to have board discussion on that. And that's also in this policy. And then the rest of it, again, is just a summary of our capital improvements or our fixed asset policy, which I just talked about, as well as our debt policy, and then our financial reporting policies. So I hope that you appreciate this.
I do.
I know this has been a long board meeting. I tried to make this as short as possible with the board meeting. I appreciate Derek and Carl for extending that so long so that my time up here is limited.
So, Doug, we do appreciate the time and effort, and it's important, as you mentioned, it's not just for convenience, it affects our bond rating and interest rates and everything else. But Doug, how much of this was just basically putting it down in a policy, or kind of how much is new, or is this, how much is this just actually getting it down to a formal written policy that is there for?
It's some of it's new, like some of the assumptions that are in there, some of the detail items that are in there are new, but overall the whole policy is as it has been. And really, since I joined governmental accounting, municipal accounting, except for major changes, this is pretty much the same type of policy that it goes on. I mean, there are some changes throughout the years, but for the most part, to maintain a good financial department, to maintain good financial for the village, you have to follow these policies, and they haven't really changed over the years.
And then how often do we, review these or need to review these, or if there's something in here that, based on changed circumstances, we don't want to be constrained by an outdated policy, how would those types of things come about?
So the finance director is charged with reviewing the policies on an annual basis, and through discussion with Tim, or discussion with other department heads, or discussion with any board member, changes can be brought back to the board for those changes into the policy. Like, for instance, say, and I don't know how this is going to work out, but the consolidation of the pension fund, that's going to have a direct effect on the policy here, and we're going to have to come back to the board and make those changes.
Right.
So those, it's a very fluid type document, and it can be changed at any time as long as I can bring it to the board for their review and approval.
If I could just share a comment. One of the importance of having these kind of policies is it binds not only us, it binds the board. If I'm gone, if Doug's gone, Derek's gone, it binds future, it provides consistency and legitimacy to everything we do. So that if any of us are gone, this stuff doesn't matter. This stuff is written now, it's a policy. If the board approves it, which if the board is comfortable with this, we'll bring it back at the next board meeting and you can approve it. But it does create the playbook of how we're gonna operate, as Doug said, to maintain the professional integrity of, not professional integrity, but the integrity of our fiscal structure, because nothing gets done.
Questions or comments from the board?
The only question I'd have is, so now like the 2-year and the 10-year treasury rates now heading up, over 2.5% and is climbing. Is there anywhere that, do you have an advisor? Is there a fund family or someone that reaches out to you and say, hey, you might want to move your friends over to this? This is now paying a higher rate on reserves, or no, we just keep everything at First National Bank of Brookfield, or?
Well, to tell you the truth, we don't really have a whole lot of money to play with in that area. Right now, our total holdings are probably around 10 million in cash. But of that 10 million, 5 million is held in the TIF fund for Ogden, which we want to keep pretty fluid, and the MFT fund, which there are restrictions on that. So that's a big portion of it. There's also some bond fund money still left from the 2022 bonds, which I need to use to cover engineering fees from the past year, and I can probably use some of that to cover some of the next year's road program. And then the other thing is in the general fund itself, 1 million is in a CD over there at the First National Bank for the reserve, and the other one is 2 million is already sitting over there for bond payments, which is going to be paid out in December. So of that group of money, it's all spent already, kind of a deal. We don't really have a big reserve that we're sitting on. And there's always a financial investment advisor out there knocking on the door saying, what can I do for you? How can I help you? Even where we keep our bond proceeds at. And if I did need to help, I would go out and talk to them about it. Certainly I would. So right now, it's 50% at First National Bank of Brookfield. I had this all figured out. 50% there, 30% at Illinois or Amalgamated, and then the rest is over at PMA. So those are our big accounts. And First National Bank of Brookfield, they're fully collateralized on all of our accounts there, as is PMA and Amalgamated. So it's all safe. It's just, at this point in time, it's not really earning as much as I would like it to earn, but I'm not in the position to put it in a long-term investment.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board? All right, so we'll put this up on the agenda for the 25th for adoption of the policies. Thank you very much, Doug. Okay, that ends the items we up for regular business. Is there any public comments? Seeing none on either side, is there a need for executive session? Okay, so at 8:15 p.m., I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion was made by trustee Cote, second by trustee Kaluzny. Roll call, please.
Trustee Ketchmark?
Aye.
Trustee Cote?
Aye.
Trustee Hendricks?
Aye.
Trustee Conroy?
Aye.
Trustee Leclerc?
Aye.
Trustee Kaluzny?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, the meeting's adjourned at 8:15 p.m. Thank you for coming, everybody.